Ontario's new progressive Conservative government made some significant policy decisions in the past few weeks about services for Franco-Ontarians. Those decisions did not go over very well in that community. Joining us now with their perspectives, from our studio at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Serge Miville. He is Assistant Professor and Franco-Ontarian History Research Chair at Laurentian. From our studio at Queen's University in Kingston, Stéphanie Chouinard, Assistant Professor of Canadian Politics, cross-appointed at the Royal Military College and Queen's University. And here in our studio, François Boileau, Ontario's French Language Services Commissioner, and we are delighted, Commissioner, to welcome you here to our studio for the first time, and to our guests out of town. Thanks for being on the program tonight. I got to do one of these full disclosure things before we get started. I do have a ceremonial role at Laurentian University. I'm the Chancellor at Laurentian, have been for about 5 or 6 years, so we just put that on the table since Laurentian may be part of this discussion to come. François, I want to start with you. You've had this job for 11 years.
That's correct.
Fair to say that there have not been 2 weeks like the past 2 weeks in any of those 11 years?
I believe that's fair, yes.
That's what I thought. Okay. Tell us what your job, your mission has been over those 11 years.
So we do receive complaints. So I do have an ombudsman role, but we do more than that. We have a role also to protect and promote French language. And it's a role of advice to government. So that's what we do. We take care of people who do have issues, who are caught up in the system, in healthcare, for instance, or access to justice, or with the children's aid societies. But what we do, we also take issues that I see that are priorities or that are important.
So you advocate. You advocate
Yes.
for the community.
Absolutely.
That's part of your job.
Absolutely.
Well, that job took a bit of a turn not too long ago because the Minister of Finance, Vic Fedeli, in his fall economic statement not too long ago, announced that he was eliminating your position. This was the first thing he announced, eliminating your office and moving the functions of that office into the Office of the Ombudsman of Ontario. And here's how he justified it on the day. Sheldon, if you would. What if you're one of the more than 500,000 people in this province for whom French is their first language, and you have decided to wind up the Office of Francophone Affairs? If you're French-speaking in this province, why would you think that this government gives a damn about you anymore?
Well, the Office of Francophone Affairs, the Children's Services, all of these offices will now be moved into either the Auditor General or the Ontario Ombudsman's Office, so you can still have the same service, the same I call it complaints, I guess challenges, and you'll still have somebody being able to respond to you, but it'll come from a centralized area, and we're looking for efficiencies.
8 days later, in fact, it was on a Friday afternoon at 5:04 p.m., which is traditionally not the time when governments want a lot of attention for the announcements they make, the province did send out the following release. Premier Doug Ford announced 3 new policy directions that Ontario's government for the people will adopt in recognition of the significant and ongoing contributions of Franco-Ontarians and Francophones to Ontario over the past 400 years. Number 1, the French Language Services Commissioner under the Office of the Ombudsman. Number 2, the Office of Francophone Affairs becomes the Ministry of Francophone Affairs. And number 3, there'll be a senior policy advisor responsible for Francophone Affairs in the Premier's office. Caroline Mulroney, meantime, just the other day got sworn in to her now expanded role with this new quote. Caroline Mulroney has proven herself time and again to be a tireless champion for the Francophone community. She will be an important voice in Cabinet as an advocate for the language, the culture, and the community of Ontario's Francophonie. Stéphanie, can I get you to come in and talk about what you think has happened here?
Well, it seems like the government responded to the pushback that was happening since the release of the economic statement. The Franco-Ontarian community, but the French-Canadian community at large responded very quickly and very virulently to these first cuts. And so the government felt the need to backtrack. However, the community was also very quick to respond that this backtrack, while saluted, was definitely not sufficient in the face of the fact that the French Language Service Commissioner was not gaining his independence back, and the French Language University in Toronto was not back on the table, which were the 2 most important cuts.
Serge, why do you think this blew up as quickly as it did?
Well, historically, Franco-Ontarians have never seen themselves as being a minority like any other, and they have historically tried to create societal institutions that permit them to transmit and produce culture and to maintain themselves in time. They've also have a long history of having to battle with the provincial government in order to maintain autonomy and governance of these institutions. We've seen this time and time again throughout history, and most notably in the Montfort fight back in 1997 under the previous administration.
Yeah, Francois, let's bring that up, because the Montfort Hospital, which is the French language hospital in the province of Ontario, in Ottawa, 20 years ago, the Mike Harris government tried to close it. The community responded. That hospital's still open. Do you see similarities between then and now?
There could be similarities. Actually, our guests can be better off to speak about that because that's more on the policy side and more of what the community will bring about. But certainly, the fact that there is a closure of any possibility to take care of the growing issue of the lack of post-secondary education in central southwest part of the province, which is the part of the province where Francophones are growing in mass numbers. We're growing really fast here in Toronto and the GTA, and we do have a lack of post-secondary education. So the cut of the French university is felt deeply. And for my office, well, I'll let others speak about that, but certainly the point to eliminate the position of independence, well, we had an institution, Franco-Ontarian have an institution now within the Legislative Assembly. It's not just symbolic, it's a question of being able to do our own, for the commissioner to have our own priorities and to decide on our own budget.
So just so I'm clear, the fact that they have maintained your position, not standalone, but inside the Ombudsman's office, that's not adequate for you?
Actually, it's not my position. It's another position, because my own position, though the title seems to be the same,
it does.
It's not me. It cannot be me, because it's not just. I'm an officer of Parliament, and that position will be cut. Now, when they said that in the Bill 57 that all employees, which I'm not, will be transferred to the Ombudsman's office, then one of them will be, most probably, be the commissioner. So it cannot be me, because I am not an employee of the. Paradoxically, I'm not an employee of the French Language Service Office, because I'm an employee of the Legislative Assembly.
That's right. You report to the provincial parliament.
Correct.
I understand. Okay. Serge, let's do, I would like to pick up on the Montfort example, because 20 years ago, when the Harris government tried to close Montfort, there was an enormous eruption, very much the likes of which we're seeing right now. In that case, the government of the day stood down and the hospital survives. What do you see happening this time?
Well, they stood down, but only after going through courts. Now, things have changed quite a bit since 1997, social media being one of the ways that people are offering up resistance and circulating ideas. There's also the fact that, contrary to 1997, where there was actually a board of individuals that were studying the services in the health services in Ontario, this government did not consult with Franco-Ontarians and did not consult with the population with regards to these cuts. And I think that's one of the sore points and part of the reason why people reacted so quickly towards this. And right now, people in the Franco-Ontarian community are trying to find a political solution in order to put this past us. Currently, the political solution proposed with the amendments are not cutting it. People aren't buying it. And I think the government will have to go back to the drawing board with that, because they may face, and this is a real possibility, they may face court battles in the future should the Franco-Ontarian community feel as though the movement is not significant enough.
Stephanie, let me pursue the Quebec angle with you. The new Premier of Quebec visited with Premier Doug Ford at Queen's Park last week, and he expressed his disappointment, he says, at the meeting that the two of them had. What role, if any, do you think the Premier of Quebec, or Quebecers in general, had in the rethinking of the position that the Ontario government has since demonstrated?
So yes, François Legault was stuck with what was seen as a bit of a sore point for him to come to meet Doug Ford for the first time. And he had his own agenda, notably trying to sell some hydroelectricity to Ontario, but he felt the need to address this question. It seems like just like Andrew Scheer, actually, he hit a wall when he tried to bring up this point with Mr. Ford, and he expressed his disappointment after their meeting. So what can the Quebec government do now? There's been some ideas that have been floated around. For example, facilitating the registration of Franco-Ontarian and French Canadians from outside of Quebec, students to Francophone universities in Quebec. The Quebec civil society also had been involved greatly, actually, in the Montfort crisis. Quebecers had given thousands of dollars to the Montfort cause, and it's expected that Quebecers might do just the same this time around, as the Assemblée de la Francophonie de l'Ontario is also possibly facing a court battle. And the Quebec media came out very strongly against this decision as well, both actually in French but also in English. The Montreal Gazette especially came out very quickly to denounce these cuts. So there's actually quite a bit that Quebec can do, both on the political front but also on the civil society front during this crisis.
And Serge, let me get you to react to, let me put it this way. One of the reasons in previous years that various governments of Ontario have been afraid to reduce French language services is that they were concerned that it might stoke separatist sentiments in the province of Quebec. You know, obviously there's a difference of opinion about that. Some people think that that's a separatist card that gets played and doesn't really have any oomph anymore. Others say you don't want to, wake up the beast. What's your view on that?
I think you can't study what's happening currently in Ontario in isolation. What we're looking at is eyes are now looking at Ontario and keeping an eye as well on what's happening in New Brunswick. And I believe the Quebec government will be taking stock of what is happening in both these provinces, and as well as in the West, because I get the feeling right now is that civil society and Francophone Canadians are going to send a message on if it's acceptable or unacceptable to bring about such drastic changes in these services without consultations. And the question remains right now is, what kind of country are we? Do we still believe in linguistic duality? And if so, is this style of governance acceptable today?
Commissioner, I want to pursue the notion of the post-secondary angle on this story with you. Again, there are two schools of thought here. Some people believe that it's high time for a French language university in Toronto, which the previous government of Ontario had promised to make happen. Others say, you've already got Laurentian University as a bilingual institution. You've got the University of Ottawa as a bilingual institution. You've got Glendon College at York University, which provides French language classes as well. And that therefore, the French fact is served well by the status quo. What's your view?
Well, when I did a report in 2012, there was about 0 to 3% of the equivalent of French language programs here in the central southwest part of the province, Glendon combined. After that, the government injected $16.5 million for 3 years for new programs in Glendon, but still it's hardly sufficient. We're right now perhaps at 6 to 9% of equivalent programs. In Laurentian, it's actually 33, and in Ottawa, it's 36%. So there's a lack of post-secondary education throughout the province. And having a bilingual university is not the same as having a French university, because we've never had one. Other jurisdiction has that, in Manitoba, in Nova Scotia as well, and of course in Acadia, in Moncton. But the point is that we have a growing demand for post-secondary education in French. We're talking about
I should stop you there. The Premier disputes that. The Premier says that the existing French language courses at the various post-secondary institutions around the province are undersubscribed at the moment. Therefore, we don't need a new French language university.
Yeah, factually that's not entirely correct, because the fact that we do have some courses, but we have a lack of specialized courses in certainly here in Toronto. And the point is, every study says that after 80 kilometers, the students stay home. If it's more than 80 kilometers, then it's a choice of the student to actually go elsewhere, Ottawa or Sudbury, or elsewhere in the country. So this is why the 80-kilometer rule is so important, to keep within the GTA access to programs at post-secondary education, and it's about also our future as a province. We do have high demand for bilingual jobs, but if we don't have, and we invest so many millions of dollars for Francophone schools and immersion schools as well, and then there's this gap at post-secondary education, especially here in Toronto. And that's the gap where the people get their training. It's only in English, so then they lose their capacity to offer bilingual services because they're not trained in it, and therefore we have a lack of professionals that can actually take care of people.
Let me get Serge's take on this. The fact that this new French language university is not, at least for now, going to happen in the capital city of the province, what's your view of that?
Well, the thing that François Boileau mentioned is a gap in programs. I would argue that historically as well, part of the gap is the gap of governance. And I think the Assemblée de la Francophonie de l'Ontario is clearly hitting on that nail currently, stating that indeed we do have bilingual institutions. However, school governance, which was such a huge issue in the 70s, 80s, and 90s within the school system, the Francophone school system, that remains to be achieved with regards to university. Might I remind you that we obtained in 97 school governance, in the early 90s obtained French language colleges. Right now, the gap remains with the post-secondary in terms of the universities, in terms of the governance of these programs. So I think that's also a big issue that the community is voicing right now.
Okay, Stephanie, with just a couple of minutes to go, I want to ask you this question. It is not exactly, this just in, that Francophones and Anglophones in the province of Ontario, at least many of them, live in two different solitudes. We have a French fact in the province of Ontario that is less than 5% of the population. And I wonder what you think the other 95.3% of Ontarians who are not Francophones think about this whole issue.
Well, I think that there's actually a fair bit of support if you only consider the fact that basically every immersion program in Ontario is busting at the seams. And this is actually part of a clientele that would be very interested in a full-fledged homogeneous French university in the GTA, for example, that we tend to dismiss. Those students and those parents want to master both official languages. They see that as a value, and not just for work purposes once they grow up and become adults, but also because culturally it gives them a better understanding of who we are as Canadians. And there's a lot of value in that, and I think that a lot of Ontarians actually understand this. Now, the problem with the position that the present government is taking regarding the Franco-Ontarian University is that they're trying to depict this as a liberal project. But we need to remember that during the electoral campaign this summer, both Doug Ford and Caroline Mulroney came out very strongly to reassure the Franco-Ontarian community that they would go ahead with this project, despite the fact that everyone would need to tighten their belts because they were predicting some economic hardships. So it's actually quite incorrect to say that this was a project of the Liberal government, because for months the Franco-Ontarian community had been told that this project was going to go ahead.
Well, there is an expression in politics, that was then, this is now. We will continue to watch this with tremendous interest because obviously this story is not going away. So let me thank Stéphanie Chouinard from Queen's University and the Royal Military College, Serge Miville from Laurentian University, and François Boileau, the French Language Services Commissioner for the province of Ontario. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci. Au revoir.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.